So I'd like to welcome John Levin as our keynote conversation person. I've known John for many years, and I've always been full of admiration for his things he's done internally, but also his vision and tenacity about trying to push forward a data specification called TIDES, Transit ITS Data Specification, that I've been fully supportive of from the beginning. And we'll get to that. But I thought it would be fun to have a conversation with John about himself, about his department, about data, and about TIDES. As part of, as I mentioned earlier, my whole career has been predicated on trying to build bridges between the research innovation community and the practitioner community, and John illustrates one of the foremost leaders in this whole sphere of transit data and trying to use it, and in an industry that's very conservative and very operations driven, and it's been quite slow on getting on the ball. But it's getting there. Things have been really improved a lot in the last 4 or 5 years, and there are more agencies that are getting into it, that are tackling it, and hiring business analysts, data scientists, data engineers. For me, that's an indicator that things are getting better. So we thought we'd have a conversation for the benefit of all the people participating, and particularly perhaps the academic side, because they do applied research, and those who want to do applied research, but this will give some feeling about the realities of trying to do that. So, John, your title is Director of Strategic Initiatives. It's a very interesting title. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what that department does. Does it only deal with data? And how you got there? I don't really know how you got to that to that department. So, what do you? Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you again, Brendon and Amira and everybody for having me here today. It's a really great opportunity, so I really appreciate it and the opportunity to share with you. So yeah, my name is John Levin, Director of Strategic Initiatives. I've been with Metro Transit in Minneapolis, St. Paul for about 26 years now, and started as an associate transit planner. Essentially my second career coming out of a planning program at the University of Minnesota. I spent a few years as a software developer. Before that, wasn't enthused about manufacturing software, which is of course really funny because now I'm kind of back helping to at least tangentially related to some projects around enterprise resource planning. But at the time it really wasn't exciting me, so kind of looked for new opportunities and ended up at Metro Transit as a planner. Spent much of my career in the service development department at Metro Transit. So we operate bus and light rail and one commuter rail line. So doing kind of the whole gamut of planning, service analysis, scheduling over that time period. And in about, I would say 2013, 2014, we had a strategic planning exercise as an organization. And a couple of things that came out of that exercise were, first was a kind of a statement. We talk about doing new initiatives, but we never really get them off the ground, or we get them off the ground, but we never follow through on them. And another statement that came out of that strategic planning exercise was, we have all this data, we don't know what to do with it. And that's what people said, but what they really meant was, we have all this data, we use it a lot, but we know there's so much more we could do with this data. And so at the time, the general manager said, we should try to address these issues. We should, and as you said, a very operational focused organization, we should set aside resources to think about these bigger picture issues of how do we effectively use data? How do we kind of move initiatives forward? And so we created the Strategic Initiatives Department in about 2014. And I would, for sure, for an organization that's, about 150 years old, kind of you go back over time, and again, very operational focus, we're pretty new and still pretty figuring ourselves out. I will say that we've been probably more successful on that data side than on the initiative side. Not to say that we don't do initiatives here, and we certainly support initiatives within the department, but when it came down to it, a lot of the success we had has been around data and also technology, and I'll talk about that a little too. So yeah, in 2014, we kind of actually brought in staff internally from within the organization who were really strong in data science. Started to call them data scientists because that's what they are, or were, and really started to seek out some projects and really had some great initial success. I mean, and I will be the first to say I don't take all the credit for the success we've had. I've been really lucky in terms of hiring people with really good technical skills, with good technical management skills, people who are good storytellers, and people with a go out and get it done attitude. And sometimes lucking into that for sure, but that's has a lot to do with the success of our group, is having people who are excited about it. And I don't think that's an accident either. And we can talk about that some too. But we had some early success. We did some, we had success around what you might think of as traditional business intelligence work. So for example, around ridership data, just creating better tools to see ridership trends, kind of new analytical, approaches to looking at ridership data, and interactive tools to really get at the questions you're trying to answer. We had some good success when it came to developing more complex models. So we developed, for example, a model around accident prediction, a random forest model. And don't ask me to get into the details of it, but the idea that we can use different analytical techniques to try to answer the difficult questions that we have. And we also, really started to really recognize that a lot of the challenges that we have with data and analysis have less to do with having the right tools or techniques and a lot to do with having the right data, and that getting the access to the data, extracting meaning from it, using messy data is where to then and to this day, the bulk of our activities have centered. So I don't know, that's kind of where we're at. So we've created the department in 2014. We've grown over that time. Initially, we actually did have the shared mobility program at Metro Transit was started out in our department as an initiative. I feel, sad and proud, both bittersweet, that we have kind of pushed that project program out of the nest and homed it in another area that can keep it growing and thriving. We've kind of done similar things on a different scale with asset management. We didn't have the asset management program, but we really have tried to kind of push forward our thinking. So it really has been, a mix of activities, again, but all going back to that early, 2014 vision of we should be strategically thinking about data and thinking about projects.
That's quite remarkable. I mean, a number of agencies have strategic planning departments or corporate planning departments. It usually is just a euphemism for doing capital planning and fulfilling the FTA requirements and so forth. And in fact, I did a study in 1985 on this, and it's the same today. There's more change with chief innovation officers,
Yep.
But it's really interesting that data was part of the launch of the whole department. Could you discuss a little bit, so how big is the department? What percentage is sort of the data people versus other activities? And where does it fit in? Is it under service planning, or is it, so forth?
Great question. Yeah, great. And I didn't finish kind of my description of where we are today. So where we ended up today is we are, I think there's 17 total staff right now in the department. We are housed within a relatively new group within the organization called Administration and External Affairs. So that group, which reports to the Chief of Staff and has customer relations and marketing and communications and equity and inclusion. So a lot of these kind of both externally focused, but also services across the organization. Those are kind of things that bring us together. Our group strategic initiatives doesn't have that same external focus, but we do have this notion of being a service. So that administration type role. within the organization. So providing services across the entire organization. So that's where we're housed. Structurally now, we really have simplified our structure in the last, I would say 6 months or so. We have a research, data, and analysis group that has 5 data scientists. So 2 principal data scientists and then 3 data scientists and senior data scientists and a couple interns in that group. So they really do, again, the research, supporting research, and we have a senior researcher in that group as well, who does a lot of survey research. That's one of the other areas that we really have expanded our approach and expertise in, and tried to do kind of step up our game when it comes to both customer surveys and employee surveys. So that group, again, really focused on data, research, analysis. Then the other half of the department is a technology management group, a business technology group. Now we are you can kind of call it maybe a decentralized or federated organization when it comes to technology. Maybe I'll take a step back and talk about the context of Metro Transit. So
I forgot to mention Metro Transit operates in Minneapolis, St. Paul, in the regional area. I should have mentioned that. But you should also mention just what's the bus fleet and LRT fleet, just so that people could put those numbers that you just mentioned in perspective, just
absolutely.
Roughly.
Yep. Yeah. So Metro Transit operating bus and rail service in Minneapolis, St. Paul region, a region of roughly 3.5 million people. Boy, a bus fleet now, I know, these are numbers that we're at 400 to 500 peak buses within this current phase of the pandemic. We were 750 peak buses pre-pandemic, just to give you a sense. And then rail, I should know this number, but we have 2 light rail lines, about 10 miles long each. And I don't have the number of cars off the top of my head, but it gives you
an idea.
Sense of it. Yeah. We were roughly 70, 80 million rides pre-pandemic. We're, in that 40 to 50 million now, currently.
I should just mention, when you say rides, the US measure boardings.
Yes, boardings. Yes.
In Canada, we use revenue riders.
Yep.
We're moving towards more and more boardings like everybody else in the world. But anyway,
So, so we, up until the 70s, public transportation in Twin Cities was a private entity. In about 1970, like so many other places around the US, came under public control. And it was its own organization at that time, kind of a separate organization, kind of essentially a regional government. And then we had a separate metropolitan planning organization, so that did the long range planning, transportation planning for the region. And in the mid 90s, there was an effort to centralize the regional functions of transit and wastewater management within this regional planning organization. So the idea of creating sort of a regional government that was both planning and operational in scope. So we are an operating division then of a regional government, and that is different than, one thing you'll see when you work in transit is that while the bus and train and all that kind of looks the same from the outside, the structure that is behind it varies every single organization. And so which then makes it a lot harder sometimes to kind of generalize the approach that you take to the technology or to the data or to the operation of that service. So we are Metro Transit as an operating division, and in particular, kind of for our work, information services is a centralized function of the Metropolitan Council. So our enterprise services, our databases, and our email, and our their desktops and all that is managed centrally across the entire organization of 4,000 people or so. And then Metro Transit, department by department, we manage some of the operational technology systems like the AVL system or the fare collection system, for example, with support from information services, but then that kind of management is shared. And it's complex, and it sometimes makes it harder move quickly. There's also benefits to the structure in terms of economies of scale, in terms of how we run those enterprise services. I don't have to worry about databases in the work that I do, because other people are worrying about that. I just have to worry about the content of them. So that is kind of our structure of the, so that's kind of how Metro Transit fits into the kind of the regional, the organizational Met Council structure. And then again, strategic initiatives as a department within Metro Transit. Of course, even within Metro Transit, there are some departments that have a lot of technical staff, business systems analysts, and data focused people, and operational technology focused people, and then other departments that don't have any of that but have a lot of technology questions or data questions. And so even within our organization, our role kind of varies depending on who we're working with, and what their needs are.
That's interesting. And what about, just out of curiosity, like GIS? Are there GIS specialists in the organization? Are they in your group, or are they over in planning and so forth?
Yeah, most of the so GIS is so that kind of follows the same pattern. There is a central GIS group within information services that maintains the kind of the core GIS technology, and we're at Esri ARC shop here. So we have, they maintain the servers and a lot of the data resources that are used on GIS. A lot of the main users of GIS tend to be in the planning side. And so, for example, in service development group, they have several planners who have expertise in GIS for creating maps and somewhat for doing analysis with the GIS as well. Our group does geographic based analysis and analytics. We don't always use that same kind of core platform. We tend to use kind of maybe lighter weight platforms for doing that mapping and analysis of geographic data. So we definitely support kind of geographic analysis when that comes up in our work. But it's a little bit messy because of the structure, I would say, and also because there, it's always that fine line between having an enterprise system that you're using that you can develop deeper expertise and a backbench on, and and not get caught when somebody leaves the organization, and yet you also want to be you on the leading edge of technology, and you want to be looking at what's new and trying new things that are effective. And so we're always kind of finding the right spot when it comes to how we apply technologies, and GIS is a great example of that.
Yeah, I can imagine, especially with you having a centralized service for the whole region, there'd be a natural tendency to try to centralize, and there's always that tension. I asked about the GIS because I've often used that as a symbol or a symptom of whether agencies were moving into data, because that was the first area that they would start using data. And I remember a couple of years ago, the contrast of TriMet having 6 GIS specialists versus some big agencies in Canada that much 3 times bigger and only had 1. And it was just sort of symptomatic of whether there was an interest in data or not, and how it was evolving. All of that changes over time. Yeah,
sure.
And so what about the smart card data? Where's that fit in? Are you the custodians of it, or is it over in finance, and how does that work?
Yeah, so that's another great example when it comes a lot of different data sets we use. Smart card data is one, fare collection system beyond just smart card data is one. The vehicle location systems, a lot of different technologies that are on our that we use operationally, and then data flowing off of those systems is useful not just for the operation, but for a lot of other questions. So, for example, the fare collection systems in our organization, so we have 4 or 5 different fare collection systems right now. So we have GFI fare boxes, we have a cubic smart card system, we have a Flowbird ticket vending machine system, we have a token transit mobile tickets, and I think there's one more that I'm missing somewhere in there. And so Those are, by and large, those are owned by a revenue operations group within our finance department, within Metro Transit. And so they manage those systems for the purpose they're intended, which is to collect revenues and also for our fixed route bus service to collect ridership information, because we still use our fare collection system to collect ridership data. And so, but then what we have also done is we've built, data, kind of a data pipeline. So coming from, there's already a data pipeline within revenue operations as they kind of pull data from the operational systems, and then they have, with IS support, kind of processes that bring those into databases and kind of merge data from different sources. And we've also built on top of that additional data pipelines to do more analytical work. So for example, we really are interested in having that the smart card data transactionally, match to the schedule, and being able to use that really quickly as a resource without having to go figure out the vendor's data structure, for example. So we had, a few years ago, worked with a, contractor to build a data process, essentially an ETL, enterprise, and extract, transform, load, a data process to kind of put that data into a data resource that would be useful for our analytical work, for example. So not, data governance is still nascent, I will say. And so kind of who owns it or who's the data steward is still not a question I think we can answer effectively in all cases. But there certainly are pieces that the revenue operations group manages, and there's other pieces of that data process and the data resources that we manage in our group. All of it with support from information services that actually manages the technical resources involved.
Well, I was going to ask you, I think you sort of answered it, jumped the gun there, but as I've been involved, as you know, I've been observing this for decades, the evolution of the use of data. And sort of recently, actually, out of that, remember we in Transit Data 2020, we did a session on data governance. And out of that, I sort of concluded there was an arc where agencies, as they got more sophisticated and started using data, they'd solve one problem at a time. How do we use it for on-time performance? How do we get one single truth for ridership and so forth? And each time they had to work out, okay, where's the data come from? Who's going to give access to it? How can it be used? Who if you use an application, who's going to support it? So forth. And at some point, it looks like you come to a point where you say, well, we really need to have a strategic perspective on sorting all this out once and for all, rather than ad hoc, one by one. But I get the feeling we're just starting to get to there.
But I think you're right. I think we are definitely, I attended in 2015 a meeting, Minnesota Department of Transportation has done a lot of work, and is actually sort of on the leading edge of some of this data governance work, and kind of building a formal structure around that. But a lot of the DOTs are way ahead of public transportation, and there's probably a lot of reasons for that. Their similarity in structure and et cetera, and I think they have longer experience with using data, not just operationally, but from a planning perspective and for different purposes.
Right.
I think we're starting to get there on the transit side. I hear more and more conversation. People, I would say 5-10 years ago, when you talked about data governance, people like don't even know what you're talking about, right?
Right.
Now I think when you say data governance, people are like, oh yeah, we need to work on that, right? And so I think it's getting better. I think the last 10 years, this explosion in how you can use data, but also the explosion in the challenges of working with data. The fact that transit data now is fundamental to the operation, right? So especially from a customer information perspective, you think of, if I want to have a good real-time information, static and real-time information for my customers in my GTFS and GTFS real-time feeds, what is the process I have to have in place around data to make that happen, both current data and store. I mean, all of that requires a much finer grain and detailed consideration of how you're managing data in the organization that we really didn't have before. So I think that has really driven this need, as well as people seeing the opportunity to use data more completely and effectively to manage service. So I think we're getting there. And I hear a lot more conversation about it.
Oh, I think so. And I think also the fact that, as young people with more experience with using data come into the organizations, their eyes are perhaps more open to what could be done with the data. And then it poses the question, well, can we access it? How do we clean it? Who owns it? What silos do we have to break down with hammers and so forth and so on?
Yep.
But it's interesting. It depends on the organization, the relative relationship between planning and operations and finance and CEOs and IT, and where data fits into all of that process. So I gathered that this data came from that original strategic planning process, but there must have been, well, you said support from the highest level, because that's you need that to make anything happen, right?
Yeah, I think by and large as an organization, I mean, we have always been a technologically savvy organization. We were relatively early when it came, for example, and this is just within my career, I think you can go back farther, but when it came to AVL systems and APC, automatic passenger counter systems, relatively early when it came to real-time predictions, for example. So we were publishing kind of our own feed of real-time predictions for every bus stop in our system, before GTFS real-time had been figured out as a specification. And so our problem then was going back and retrofitting to say, oh, we need to put it in a different format. So I think we've always kind of had a appreciation for kind of the application of technology within our work. And I think that support has been across the organization. I do think sometimes we haven't quite known how to actually manifest that in certain areas, and certainly when it comes to data and analysis, I think we're still figuring that out. There's a lot of things that we aren't doing today that we could be doing that I think should still be priorities, and even just the basics of business intelligence, just having the ability for anybody in the organization to kind of get at the data they want to see and see it in a way that's useful to them. That's still an area that I think we actually have some opportunity in, even in our organization. But yeah, I think there's been support from the general managers. There's been support from kind of the leadership team, for sure, over the last 10, 15 years.
That point you made, I mean, one of the questions that comes up, and we've talked about it in lots of other forums, is like, well, what does it take to get the interest from the policy boards and general managers? And it's a combination of developing internal dashboards, but it's using things like visualization techniques and use cases that catch their attention. And different people are going to be attracted by different things, but I think that's something that's important for people to pursue in order to try to cement that interest and the resources.
Yeah, I think in a few cases we were able to answer questions that people thought were difficult to answer, and we're excited to see the answer. So one of the things that we did early on is applying a deseasonalizing our ridership data, so kind of using a more sophisticated trend analysis on ridership data, which is nothing super sophisticated, but we just hadn't done it before. And being able to really see, because for us, ridership is very seasonal. And the seasonality actually varies by route, depending on the nature of the route. And so it can be really difficult to see your trends in ridership when you don't know if it's going up or down because of something you've done or that's happened or because of the seasonal nature of it. You can eyeball it, right?
Yeah,
But it can be hard to look at, or you can look at year over year data, but then you got to wait for a year to see the
yeah,
impact. And so deseasonalizing the data is a way to kind of see those trends more clearly. That type of analysis, like people really got it. And they were like, oh, I can see now what's happening. I can start to ignore the jagged line, and I can just look at the trend and
yeah.
know that that's going to tell me something, give me more information, even with less data, for example.
Eh,
Um,
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, so that was one example. Another example that came up is there was a request several years ago for a lot of data on our fair inspection and our fair citations that we had written.
Mhm.
Um, and one of the things that we were asked was, when somebody looks at this data, what are they going to see? So we actually did some analysis, and we kind of said, what is in this data? Because we hadn't looked at it before. And our group was able to show that, there were patterns that, were showing that, different groups were getting warnings versus citations, at different rates. And we said, maybe there's a pattern here that we should be addressing through policy.
Mm, mhm.
And that ability then to go out and say, as we released the data to the people requesting it, we were able to say, well, here's the data. And actually we took a look at the data and we actually see this, there's some things going on here. And we're actually going to address that through a policy change. That radically transformed the conversation. And I think people started to see that there is a value in the ability to kind of make sense of data, understand what it's telling us. And that's really the question that comes up a lot for our group is, we've got this data. Can you tell us what we can see? What can we see? What story can we see in this data? That's fundamentally the question that we're getting asked.
That's very interesting. I mean, normally I might perceive that, the first use of that kind of analysis would be to say, okay, this is how we're going to target fair evasion enforcement and monitoring, because we see the patterns of where it occurs most, as opposed to many biases that might be created by the way it's being operationalized. Yeah. And the other one you mentioned I thought was very interesting too is, and I'm sure people quite, being able to analyze the safety records or safety analyses through your machine learning and so forth. That would something that's not, I mean, you can't just through experience or intuition. It doesn't give you enough profound analysis there to work
Yeah.
with.
Yeah.
One of the ones I know you've done, which I was very interested in, is the real-time information system, because the outside world doesn't know, but it's a well-known secret inside that those predictions are generally not very good. And they rely a lot on historical data. And I know Metro Transit had this specific project, which I thought was kind of cool, about a sort of a competition between a couple of groups to try to improve the predictions. I'm a little curious about what triggered that need in your mind, and sort of just maybe describe for people what you did, which was quite, I thought, interesting.
Absolutely. I'm thinking about kind of where that came from. I mean, the motivation for that work was simple. I didn't mention earlier, I was a transit advocate before I was a transit employee. I ride the system a lot. And when you ride the system, you see things. And what a whole lot of us saw was the real-time service. And again, we were leading edge when it came to real-time, in publishing real-time information. But we also were like, I would see things that would be like, I'm glad we have this, but it's not right. And I don't really, and I don't feel I can rely on this, and I'm less inclined to tell other people to rely on it if I don't rely on it. And so there was a sense that, yeah, we're leading edge, but we're also falling behind at the very same time. And so we kind of started to dig into that. And we knew at the time that one of the things that hampered us was the 1 minute polling that we had in our AVL system at the time. And so there was, we already knew that was something we needed to address. We already knew that getting, we ended up with 8-second polling on our AVL system. we knew that was going to be a help. But when we dug into it deeper, and this is again where I think the value of a data scientist, and we haven't talked about kind of what a data scientist is. I think your audience probably knows, but it's something that I actually have to explain within a transit agency. Like, well, is this just, do they run the system? Like, or do they write reports? Like, what do they do? And the value of a data scientist, of course, is somebody who understands a domain. So in this case, transit, or real-time customer information. They understand data, how to query data, how data is structured. They understand how to do analysis of data. So they understand, statistical analyses and just kind of different ways of visualizing data to see patterns. And they understand how to create tools. And so we had, great data scientists on our staff who kind of did all those things. They wrote the system, they saw the issues, but they didn't just say, I wonder why this information says the bus will be here in 2 minutes, and this one says 4 minutes, and it actually was in 6 minutes. Like, they would observe that, then they're like, I wonder what's going on. And so they start to dig into it. They start to go look at the systems and interview people on the operational side and query data sets and run reports. And they start to see the patterns, and then they start to say, I wonder why that pattern exists. And so they really, really persistently, literally over years, kind of building up their knowledge of how all this happens across bus and across rail, categorizing the different types of problems, one by one, figuring out what's causing those problems, till we get to a point where we know that there are better systems out there, because we're paying attention, of course, to the market, and we see vendors out there with improved prediction resources, and even our own AVL vendor that is saying to us, we're improving our system too. So we were, so at that point, we kind of had a really good sense of there's a problem, pretty good sense of what's going on and what we should do to resolve it. But also knowing that we were going to make a decision that was going to, be something we're going to want to live with for a while. It's going to take some time to implement, money to implement, hard to change, don't want to go changing around a lot there. And we really weren't sure what the best solution was. Do we stick with the current vendor, what they're proposing? Do we go to another vendor? Or in this case, there's open source software for real-time predictions. And we could implement, I think at that time, Washington, DC had essentially implemented an open source tools for their services. And so this was definitely a case where you go, boy, the proof's in the pudding. And some of these systems, they're designed to learn, they're designed to improve. So if you ask a vendor to give you information on your, today, you're not taking full advantage of the functionality of that service that it learns and improves. And so this is where we went out with an RFP. That was a two-step RFP where the first was kind of selecting the vendors that we thought would be able to kind of meet our need in any way. And we ended up with 2 vendors kind of through that process. And then our current system vendor didn't bid, but we still knew that they had data coming out of their system that we could use because we had the system on site. So then the second phase of the project then was to actually do, it was also multi-phase, where we basically said, well, here's the vehicle location feed data that you're going to use to generate predictions. So come back to us in a month or 2 with a prediction engine. And show us, report on the accuracy of your system. But also we were at the same time collecting data as well, where we were collecting all their predictions, and we were collecting all the actual real-time arrivals, and doing our own analysis. So that was the first phase, and we had a good sense of, out of the box, how those systems operated. And then we said, okay, let that run for a month. And if your system is designed to kind of improve itself over time, we should see that, right? Because it should learn from itself. And so we did that. And at the end of that kind of final step, we definitely saw that, one of the vendors out there, kind of the 2 the two vendors that were bidding, they both were reasonably accurate out of the box. But at the end of that process, the one vendor that had was improving every day as opposed to the other was a little bit more static.
Coasting.
And so that allowed us to basically say, here's a vendor that can provide us a real-time prediction engine. We know out of the box what the accuracy is going to be, because they've already been running it, and it's going to be better than the system that we have today. And so we did that, and we've been using kind of that approach, and it's been not without bumps along the road, but we're definitely pleased with both the process and the outcome in terms of better predictions. But it's I'll say it's an ongoing process to be monitoring that, trying to always improve both the quality of the schedule information and the quality of the predictions. We all know the issues around how do you manage for a schedule that keeps changing, not just month to month and week to week and day to day, but minute to minute, right? The schedule's changing, and you want your customer information to reflect to the customer what's really going to happen, when they go out and wait for the bus or the train. And so this continues to be ongoing analytical work that we do, ongoing development work that we do, ongoing kind of how do we structure communications work that we do.
It's a remarkable project. It's also requires a high level of sophistication. And one of the things I've always noticed, there's no standardized metric or approach, methodology for ascertaining the accuracy of the systems. A lot of people still go out with stopwatches and sort of, there's got to be better ways. But it sounds like because you were involved also in the use of technology very early on, and the data use of that, the part of the problem in the transit industry compared to some other industries is that the sources of data, like the AVL and AFC data, that those systems weren't designed to produce data. They were designed for incident management or operational control, or for revenue accountability and audit trails and stuff like that. They weren't designed to provide real-time information. They weren't designed to provide origin destination matrices. So it's taken a long time to pivot, and the custodians of the systems tend to be those other departments, and that are less interested in data. It's coming around, I think, but it's taken time. I'm going to ask people to put questions. We're going to switch to sort of tides, but if you have questions, I hope we'll have some time at the end if you have any questions for John. So I want to talk about tides. So transit ITS data specification. You've been the engine behind this trade for a long time, and a number of us have been supportive of your efforts, myself, Jeff Becker, and others. Just before I say that, I'm going to say I want to put a plug in for anybody interested in transit data to join the TRB AP090 Transit Data Committee, because that's where all the leading spirits in this field, including they're thinking more and more about data management and data governance. So you just go to mytrb.org. You can become a friend of the committee for free. And you just go there and become a friend, sign up to be a friend of AP090 Transit Data Committee. So back to tides. Why don't you give a 2-minute explanation? I tell people about it, but this is the horse's mouth. So
yeah. Well, so my thinking about this, and others probably go back farther back. Mine goes back actually about 2014 or so, and to the series of APTA sponsored workshop that Brendon, that I know you were deeply involved in supporting and creating. But APTA had a series of workshops on the use of ITS data. And this was, so again, I was relatively new in my strategic initiatives role and my data role, and went to the workshop. I think I went to one or two of them, and shared some of the work that we were doing with AVL data and running time analysis, for example, and APC analysis. Saw other transit agencies, I remember Boston and New York City and Portland, kind of all presenting interesting analyses. and interesting kind of takes on data quality. This is a time period when GTFS was gaining momentum, so there was this idea of a data standard out there, and I just couldn't help but feel that like we were all solving the same problems. Everybody I would talk to, we were solving the same data quality problems. We were solving some of the same kind of developing tools that did the same things, or I would see a really cool tool from somebody else and I would just go, like figuring out how to write that, I'm going to start from scratch. I'm not going to be able to leverage any work that agency's done because my data is a different structure. And so I've got to, and that's going to really drive the design of a tool like that. And so it just got me to thinking, and conversations with a number of folks, you, Brendon, and several other folks. So just, if we have a standard format for scheduled data, why isn't there a standard format for kind of our historical data, the AVL, the APC data? Because if there was a standard format for that data, then we could create programs that run against that data, just in the same way that we have an apps that show you schedule information from anywhere. We could have apps that did ridership or running time analysis from anywhere against that standard data structure. And everybody I talked to, Brendon, you included, and everybody else was like, that's a great idea. We need that. We should have that. But it just wasn't, there wasn't a clear path to getting to that. And this goes back again to the difference in structure, I think, between how we do transit and how we do other, things like roads and DOTs, kind of how we approach technology innovation. But the one approach that we do have in transit is the Transit Cooperative Research Program. So this is a program of Transportation Research Board, National Academy of Science, and they, fund research. They ask the industry for research questions, and then they fund the research behind to answer those questions. And so the group that had been talking about this basically said, hey, we think a good question is, how would you create a standard data structure for historical transit ITS data, AVL, so automatic vehicle location, passenger counter, and fare collection data as 3 main data sets. So that was funded in 2018, yay. And the project began in 2019, was well underway in 2020. So got slowed down a little bit, everything got changed up a little bit, but it completed then in 2022. So about a year ago, that project completed. And it's a great study, TCRP report 235. And it basically goes and says, here is exactly why having a data standard for transit, historical transit data, archive data would be useful. Here's what that, if you were to create something like that, how it should be, what it should look like. And then here is a structure that you could use to do that. So they went so far as to say, here is the right, how you should structure all that data, the tables and fields, essentially, if you think in that way. And how it would all work. So that was really the impetus, the kick in the pants we needed on this TIDES project, this Transit ITS Data Exchange Specification. That outcome of that research from TCRP, really, then we said, this is great. This is what we needed. So we're going to take that research result and we're going to try to put it into practice as a open format or open standard data format for historical data. And so that's where we are right now. So we are going to we're working on developing version 1.0 of this data specification. It is based very much on the output of the research, but as you get into the nitty-gritty and talk through things, you kind of tweak things and figure out more and more details. And that's the process we're going through right now, is trying to create a structure that meets everybody's needs, doesn't boil the ocean, but keeps the idea of work moving forward. And I will say too, when I started talking about this project, I said it wasn't so much about it's not about sharing data. GTFS is about sharing data. Something like TIDES isn't really, you can use it to share data. It's not so much about sharing data, it's about sharing tools. It's about sharing the techniques and technology that you use to transfer data and improve data quality and report or visualize data. And so what we really hope will happen is that we'll have this data specification, and then upon that we will layer on a set of open source tools, so that when you put your data into a tides format, you then can leverage these different tools. So if you have a tool that converts the data into a different format, if you have a tool that kind of addresses data quality, AVL data is notoriously messy at terminals. You can look at the individual GPS pings and you see a very different story than the vendor tells you where's the arrival and departure from a time point. Well, what if you had a tool that basically went and looked at those individual GPS breadcrumbs and recalculated a more accurate arrival and departure from a terminal? That would be really useful to then apply that generally to your data and have a higher quality data. Or what if you had a tool that, calculated load and then took the AVL data to calculate vehicle delay, took APC data to calculate passenger loads, and combined them to show you passenger delay, and map that for you. Again, if I have my AVL APC data in the standard data format, I run it through this tool, and now I've got a map of passenger delay as an example. So I know I'm talking too much there, but it's a great project, if I do say so. And we're really on the cusp of having an open data standard, and would love to have more people kind of engaged, thinking about it in the context of their own data or their own projects, and really saying, would version 1.0 that we're proposing meet their needs, or is there something that we're missing that would make it better?
Yeah, no, that's great. And my interest is very parallel, going to lots of conferences and seeing cool applications, and then just sort of say, at best, if you're lucky, you get a PDF of the presentation. That's about it. I have put into the chat room the link for the report, to TCRP report 235, and the GitHub. I think I got the right one for the Tides GitHub. So if you have a keen interest, you go there, register, and then you can be part of the conversation, right? Right, John?
Yeah, that's right. So there's information that the GitHub has there's contributing information, and there's the actual code. I'm going to add I will add one more link in there, which is the documentation site that is built upon the GitHub. So you can go, it's kind of a more human readable version of the existing standard, the pre-version 1.0 specification.
Okay, and I also see that Michael Eichler has added in the website for TRB AP 090 Transit Data Committee, and they have a webinar tomorrow that you can sign up for. It's all, he put those in the Q&A. So Amber has a question. How can transit agencies attract and keep data scientists, i.e. be competitive with the private industry?
That is a great question. And it is a question that has actually, we've thought about a lot. And I remember early on in our work, another department had hired somebody who essentially was a data scientist. It wasn't, their formal title wasn't data scientist, but they were doing data scientist work. But they didn't really have a great technical manager who really understood the work that they were doing. And they became frustrated that they had a lot of skills and a lot of ideas, but they were just being used to write reports.
Mhm.
And they went off to General Mills, which is a local company in town here, for a career in data science. So I worried, when we were starting to hire people, the first couple staff that were in our group were internal. And we went to hire externally. I was worried, like, who's going to come work for us? We have the scale for a data scientist is essentially the scale for a planner or any other professional, most of our other kind of professional positions. There's no way we're going to compete with, private industry, Medtronic, and, General Mills, et cetera, Target, all local corporations, let alone, compete with the Minneapolis public schools that was, offering significantly more than we were. And I was pleasantly surprised that we got a lot of applicants. We continue to get a lot of applicants. We continue, when we interview, people say, I don't want to, market, diapers. I want to work on public transportation, and that's what excites me. And the ability to apply my data science skills to something that interests me is more important than making, a lot more money. Now, it doesn't mean we shouldn't be looking to, right size the salary, to match the industry better. But we have been effective in hiring because the people who have come to do this job at transit are as equally interested in transit as they are in data science.
I think that's quite true. And you mentioned, General Mills, the private companies, but the banks absorb enormous number of data scientists, and working for transit is a social good, and a lot of people appreciate that. I think it's also easier in university towns and cities, because then often for personal reasons, you meet your spouse at the university, you want to settle there. So there's an opportunity that I think that does also help sometimes a little bit.
Yep. We hire a lot of ecologists. We hire a lot of physicists. We hire a lot of I always observe that particle physicists and astrophysicists and ecologists all seem to be high on the list because they all look for patterns in enormous sets of data. So
we have a question here.
Yeah.
Great presentation. Thanks, John. Is it true everyone who attends gets a year free transit pass?
To the system of your choice.
I will answer no, but you get free access to TAL research days and all of our data and all of our presentations. Yay!
And you get some data, and you get some data.
That's right. Let me maybe the last question. What do you think? What can academics do to be as a proponent for tides and support it? Where do they fit into the equation, do you think?
Well, I honestly think academics will be a huge beneficiary of tides ultimately, because I know, in talking to a lot of folks who've done research, that they spend way more time than they thought just accessing the data,
cleaning
right?
it.
Yeah, cleaning it. And so I think when you can get to a point as an academic, researcher, and I don't quite know how this is all going to play out, the mechanics. I haven't thought about it deeply, and others probably have, but where you can say, is this data available in a tides format, and get that data that way, or even if you could say, can you get me the raw data in a tides format, and I know I can help you apply these standard data cleaning tools, and I'll actually hand you back a data set that is cleaned and processed with these standard tools that other people have written that I know how to apply.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
The thing about open source is there's so much great stuff happening in open source. I think we take for granted sometimes the skill that it takes and expertise that it takes to actually run an open source program, and so it's not, again, you're not having to redesign whatever it is that it does, but you do have to understand how software works and how to compile your code and run a code against things and all that kind of stuff. And so a lot of researchers have those skills, work with software and coding, and so being able to offer that back to the transit agency, you give me your data, I'll give it back to you in tides and leverage all these resources. There's another way to make friends with your peers in the transit agency.
That's a great point to end up on. So again, for everybody, I'd like to check out both the Q&A and chat rooms, where there are links to the TCRP report, to Tides different websites, and to the APO TRB APO 909090 and its website and so forth. And I would like for all of us to thank John, after staying up all night waiting for subways in Chicago, and for having a great conversation. It's just as good as I thought it was going to be. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. This is great. Thank you so much.